Hello and welcome back to Whispering Noir. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered through the shadows of Whispering Noir, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. I was a teenager the first time I went urban exploring, though I didn't have a name for it then. To me, it was just curiosity. The kind that makes you slow down on your bike to look through broken fences. The kind that makes you press your ear to a locked door just to hear what's on the other side. On Friday evenings, I went to the neighborhood rec center. It was part of one of those programs meant to keep teens busy, so we wouldn't end up drinking or doing drugs. The staff tried, but the program had the kind of budget you'd expect for something like that, which is to say it barely had one at all. The rec center itself wasn't the interesting part. What got to me was what stood next door. Right beside it was an abandoned winery. I grew up just north of the Grapevine, in the kind of area where wineries and orchards and farms were normal scenery. Most of those places were full of movement. Trucks coming and going, workers walking through rows, the smell of fruit and dirt and irrigation water. Even if you didn't see anyone, you could feel that a place was being used. It had purpose. That winery didn't. It sat there like a big silent block in sun-bleached white and rusted brown, like it had been left out in the weather to fade and rot on purpose. Sunburnt ivy climbed its walls and clung like a rash. Around it, the landscape stayed green and alive. Eucalyptus trees, bottle brush, the kind of bright plants that look almost fake under harsh daylight. That only made the winery stand out more. It looked like a bruise in the middle of healthy skin. Every Friday, I passed it again and again. I passed it on my way to the rec center. I passed it when the program directors let us walk to the McDonald's at the end of the block. I passed it on the way back. I passed it again when I went home. 4 chances every week for it to sit in my vision, unchanged, daring me to look closer. After a while, I couldn't stand it. I stopped seeing it as a building and started seeing it as a question I needed answered. What was inside? What did it look like after years of abandonment? Had the vats and machinery been stripped? Were there old bottles left behind? Was there anything still there that proved it used to be a real place? One Friday, I convinced a few friends to sneak away from the program with me. We weren't planning to be gone long. Just a quick look, then back before parents arrived for pickup. No one would notice. Or, if they did, no one would be able to prove anything. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't have any real gear. No masks, no gloves, no first aid kit, no plan beyond get in, look around, get out. We brought flashlights and a cheap digital camera, the kind that took grainy pictures that looked even worse when you zoomed in. Breaking in was almost disappointing because it was so easy. There was a hole in the chain link fence that looked like it had been there for years, bent open in a way that suggested plenty of people had already slipped through. After that, we found an open window and climbed in like it was an invitation. Inside, it was normal. Not normal like a home, but normal like any abandoned industrial place. Rusted metal ladders went up the sides of giant vats. The vats were empty, but dust and debris had collected in them, and their insides were stained a muddy grape purple that made it easy to imagine what they used to hold. The air smelled old. There were no dramatic discoveries, no hidden room full of barrels, no secret office with papers left on a desk. Just a dead building, and the feeling of being somewhere we weren't supposed to be. And that feeling was enough. It ran through me like a current. Standing in a place that had been closed to the public, seeing it from the inside, felt like pulling back a curtain. It felt like I'd been trusted with knowledge most people didn't have, even if the knowledge was nothing more than, this is what an empty winery looks like. It didn't make me feel rebellious. It made me feel powerful, like I'd found a shortcut around the rules of the world. That night, we got in trouble. Real trouble. The cops didn't show up, but parents did what parents do when they're scared and angry. I was grounded for weeks. I wasn't allowed back at the rec center. There were lectures. There were threats. There was that sharp disappointment in my parents' eyes that hurt worse than being yelled at. They thought they were teaching me a lesson. They thought they were cutting off the behavior before it turned into something bigger. But it was too late. I'd already tasted it. I didn't do any more exploring for a few years. At least not like that. Life moved forward the way it does. I graduated high school, got my first job, signed up for community college, moved out of my parents' place and into my first apartment. I built the kind of early adulthood routine that looks stable from the outside, but underneath it, the itch stayed. I fed it the only way I could. Blogs, forums, YouTube videos. I watched other people slip through broken fences, climb stairwells in abandoned hospitals, walk through empty schools with peeling paint and old posters still on the walls. I learned their language, urbex, locations, entry points, gear. Don't blow up the spot. I joined communities where people argued about what counted as ethical and what didn't, like it was a philosophy instead of trespassing. It wasn't like I didn't have other interests. I wasn't some cartoon character who only cared about one thing. But exploring was the first time in my life that I'd found something that really scratched that deep, almost compulsive kind of curiosity I carried around. When I was a kid, my parents used to tell me, curiosity killed the cat. Whenever I got into trouble for poking around where I shouldn't, I never said it out loud, but I always thought about the rest of the rhyme they didn't quote. Satisfaction brought it back. Once I had my own place and my own schedule, nothing could really stop me. Nobody could ground me anymore. Nobody could take away my keys or track my phone. I was free in the way only young adults are free, free enough to make mistakes that might follow them for the rest of their lives. At first, I kept it mild. Public parks, open spaces, places where being there wouldn't get me arrested. I told myself I was working up to it, dipping my toes in. I started documenting it too, taking photos, posting them carefully. I never showed my face. I never used real names. I never posted addresses or anything that could get a place swarmed and trashed. The community gave me something I didn't expect: belonging. It felt like a secret club where everyone understood the same need. People could argue all day about little details. What gear was best, whether certain types of buildings were off limits, whether it was ever okay to move something for a photo. But there were 3 rules almost everyone agreed on. Don't share names or addresses of places you explore. Research the building and the area as much as you can before going. If you can't get enough information, don't go. Take only pictures. Leave only footprints. Those rules had kept me safe for more than a year once I started doing real urbex regularly. I'd never had a serious close call. A few scared moments, sure. A weird noise. A homeless person who didn't want company. A floor that creaked too much. But nothing that made me think I'd ever actually die doing it. Then there was the fireplace store. It wasn't even special, not on paper. It was one of those businesses that didn't survive the lockdown years. By the time I found it, it had been empty for a long time. The building sat on a street with too many streetlights, too many passing cars, too much regular life for it to feel like a true ruin. But the place had still become an eyesore. 3 stories, graffiti across the outer walls, broken glass, loose bricks, the front sign hanging at an angle like it was tired. I'd been looking into it for about 2 weeks, checking public records and whatever else I could get my hands on. There was nothing dramatic in its history. No fire, no crime scene that made the news, no rumors online about secret basements or weird owners. And still, it caught my eye the same way the abandoned winery had. Once it caught my attention, I couldn't stop thinking about it until I'd seen the inside. One night, I stood under a street lamp, reading through printed public records. One more time, like the paper could somehow change. I was sure my information was solid. Then I folded everything up, put it away, and moved into the shadows. Urban doesn't always mean dark. In cities, there's light everywhere. parking lot lights, security lights, headlights, neon signs. Even abandoned places get washed in that constant glow. That's why I'd stake this building out both during the day and at night, walking the perimeter, looking for blind spots where I wouldn't be seen from the street. When I felt sure I had one, I found the little basement window I'd noticed before. It was a tight squeeze. I had to turn my shoulders and wiggle through, but it wasn't impossible. When my boots hit the cement floor inside, the sound was soft, swallowed by the space. I turned on my headlamp. Dust floated through the beam like tiny white insects. It was weirdly beautiful for something that could also be dangerous. I was glad I had my mask and respirator on. Old buildings love to hide mold and asbestos. People act like it's dramatic to wear protection, but lungs are not something you get to replace when you're bored and reckless. I looked around, expecting to see the remains of a fireplace showroom, broken displays, old stone samples, maybe a dusty register counter. Instead, I saw metal pipes, not the kind that run up into a ceiling and disappear into walls. These were horizontal, like a series of thick metal lines guiding your eyes left and right. They ran into darkness on either side, farther than my light could reach. My first thought was that I'd misjudged where I was, that I'd crawled into some utility space that connected to other buildings. Then I understood what it was, an underground tunnel. I felt my stomach drop, because this wasn't in the blueprints I'd found. It wasn't in any public record. It wasn't mentioned anywhere. My second rule, the one about research, started screaming in my head. Unknown space means unknown risk. Unknown risk means you leave. I should have turned around and crawled back out immediately. But service tunnels aren't unheard of. Some buildings have old access routes for pipes or maintenance. It was possible the tunnel connected to a different part of the same basement. It was possible the real basement was just farther down, and I'd entered through some side access no one bothered to document. I stood there arguing with myself in silence. Finally, I decided I'd only go a little way, just a few yards in each direction. If there was no access point or doorway into the building, I'd leave. I went left. I walked carefully, keeping my shoulder away from the pipes. I didn't feel heat coming from them, and I didn't expect to, but I didn't want surprises. My headlamp pushed the darkness back, but the darkness felt thick, like my light had to fight for every foot it revealed. And the more I walked, the more it felt like the tunnel didn't want to be seen. That sounds ridiculous, but it's the best way I can explain it. The dark didn't just sit there like an absence of light. It felt heavy, almost sticky, like it could pull you in the way tar pulls down a stone. Then my light caught something else, a door. At first, it didn't look real. It sort of formed out of the darkness as I got closer, the handle flashing silver when the beam hit it. The door itself was plain, no signs, no labels. Just a door in a tunnel that shouldn't exist. The handle was clean. That's what bothered me most. In an abandoned building, there's always dust. It covers everything. Dust is honest. Dust tells you no one's been there. But this handle looked like it had been wiped down recently, polished even. So someone had been here? Maybe another explorer? Maybe someone who used this tunnel and didn't want people to know. Curiosity rose in me like a hand on my spine, pushing. Questions started chattering in my head, hungry and loud. What's behind it? Why is it powered? Why is it clean? Where does it go? I reached out. The handle felt cold, solid, real. I turned it, expecting resistance, expecting a lock, expecting anything that would let me back off and call it a day. The door opened. It swung inward smoothly, silently, like the hinges had been oiled. Light spilled out, bright and white. After the tunnel's darkness, it should have been blinding, but it wasn't. It was more like stepping into an air-conditioned building after being outside in summer. Sudden, yes, but almost soothing. My eyes adjusted fast, and what I saw made my brain stall for a moment like it couldn't decide whether to believe it. I was looking into a mall. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The floor was white tile, spotless and glossy. The walls were white, The ceiling panels were white. Everything was clean in a way that didn't belong underground, not in a building that was supposed to be abandoned. The space felt sterile and calm, like a place that had never known dirt. And I felt something I didn't expect to feel down there. Nostalgia. I hadn't been to a mall in years. Even after lockdowns ended, I'd gotten used to ordering everything online. I didn't need food courts or shoe stores or wandering around half bored, but standing there, looking at that familiar shape, wide corridor, storefront openings at regular intervals, my body remembered the feeling of being in a mall. If you've been to one, you've been to them all. Different stores, different decor, same idea. This place didn't have any store names, but it still felt like a mall in the way a dream can feel like a real memory. I made sure the door wouldn't lock if it closed, then left it propped open behind me. That felt important. Like a lifeline. Then I stepped farther inside. The storefronts were identical, evenly spaced rectangular openings that looked like blank mouths. No signs, no logos, no glass displays, just perfect square entrances. I walked up to the nearest one and shined my light inside. Shelves covered the walls from floor to ceiling. They were stacked with shoe boxes, all white, no labels. Near the entrance was a kiosk, also white like it had been painted with the same brush as the walls. It looked new. I moved to the next storefront. More shelves, more white shoe boxes. The next one, too. The same. I'd explored plenty of stripped buildings before, places where the owners had taken everything useful and left only emptiness. But this wasn't empty. This was stocked in a way that made no sense. And it was clean. No graffiti, no litter, no broken glass, no dust, not even in corners, no footprints, not even a smudge on the tile. That alone felt wrong. There's a strange truth about exploring abandoned places. Graffiti can be reassuring. It means someone has been there. It means the building is part of the world, touched by humans, imperfect and familiar. Graffiti means you aren't the first, and usually it means you won't be the last. This place had none of that. It looked like it had been scrubbed moments before I walked in, and the lights were on. I could feel cool air, too. Air conditioning, steady and quiet. That meant someone was paying for power. Someone was maintaining this. So why did it exist under a dead fireplace store? Why didn't anyone talk about it? Why was it full of the same unlabeled product over and over? Every instinct I had told me to leave while I still could. Go back through the door, crawl out the basement window, never come here again. But curiosity is not a gentle thing. It doesn't ask politely, it pulls. I looked back at the open door behind me. I could always go back, I could step in a little, look around, and if anything felt off, I'd leave. So I started walking. I kept a slow pace, looking into each blank storefront as I passed. They were all the same. Shelves, boxes, kiosk, white on white on white, like the place only understood one idea and repeated it until it became reality. The corridor stretched on and on and on. It didn't curve, it didn't end. The lines where the floor met the wall and the wall met the ceiling aimed toward a point far ahead, but the point never got closer the way it should have. It was like walking toward the horizon. There were no benches, no planters, no vending machines, no trash cans, no ad posters. None of the clutter that makes a mall feel like a place where people exist. It was the shape of a mall without the life of one, an imitation that had removed anything unnecessary, leaving only the bare pattern. The space was too wide. The angles were too perfect. The brightness overhead was too consistent. I suddenly felt exposed, like I'd walked into an empty stadium under a spotlight. At the same time, the ceiling felt low in a psychological way, like the light itself was pressing down on me. I know that doesn't sound logical, but the longer I walked, the more I felt two opposite fears tightening around my chest at once. Too much space. Not enough space, like agoraphobia and claustrophobia holding hands. And the silence was just as strange as the light. In a normal tiled corridor, footsteps echo. Even soft shoes make a sharp sound. Here, my footsteps were quiet, almost muffled. It felt like walking on thick carpet, even though my boots hit hard tile. The sound didn't travel. The space swallowed it. I wanted to call out just to hear something, just to prove the air could carry noise. But exploring taught me not to announce myself. Silence keeps you safe. Silence keeps you anonymous. In this place, silence didn't feel safe. It felt like isolation, like the building itself was keeping my sound to itself. My breathing got heavier. Sweat gathered under my mask and along my hairline. My heart thumped hard, fast, like it was trying to warn me in a language older than words. Nothing made sense. It wasn't just that the mall shouldn't exist. It was that my mind felt less stable the longer I stood in it, like the place was draining something out of me. I had the sudden, sharp thought that I needed to leave right now, curiosity or not, because staying was going to cost me something I couldn't afford. I began to turn back toward the door, and I stopped. Not because I heard something, not because I saw something, because I knew. It wasn't the kind of knowing that comes from logic. It was the kind you get in a nightmare when your body understands the rules before your mind does. If I turned around, something would happen. Something final, the feeling of being watched, crawled up my spine, slow and sure. My skin prickled. Every hair on my arms rose. My stomach tightened as if it wanted to fold in on itself. I couldn't hear anyone, couldn't see anyone, but I was not alone. I stood completely still, like prey trying not to trigger a predator's attention. My hands curled into fists at my sides. My jaw clenched. Every muscle in my legs tensed, ready to run. But running felt wrong too. Running felt like it would turn the watching into chasing. I took one step forward, then another. I didn't know why I did it, except that some part of me believed the worst choice I could make was to stop moving. Another part believed the worst choice I could make was to turn around. So I did the only thing left. I kept walking like I didn't know I was being watched. I told myself there had to be another exit, another door, a stairwell, a service hallway, something. Malls have emergency exits. Malls have employee-only doors. I just had to find one before whatever was behind me decided it was done watching. My eyes darted over the white walls, the identical openings, the endless repetition. My mind tried to measure distance, tried to map where I was in relation to where I'd entered, but the corridor didn't behave like a real space. It didn't give me landmarks. There were no changes in tile pattern, no signs, no store names, nothing to mark progress. How long had I been walking? 10 minutes? An hour? There were no windows, no skylights, no clocks. The lights overhead didn't flicker. The air stayed the same cool temperature. Even my phone didn't help. I don't know if it lost service or if I was too afraid to pull it out and look. The idea of taking my attention away from the corridor for even a second made panic spike in my chest. It felt like stepping out of time. Like this mall was not really under the building at all, but somewhere else. Somewhere between places. The kind of gap you don't think about, like the thin space behind a wall where wires run. A nowhere space. And I was in it, so I walked. For what felt like hours, then longer. My feet began to hurt. Then they began to burn. Sweat soaked my shirt under my jacket. My mouth got dry, my throat ached from breathing through the mask. My body started to feel less like a tool I controlled, and more like something I was dragging along with me. The corridor never changed. The storefront stayed the same. White boxes, white shelves, white kiosks. The hum of the lights stayed steady. The silence stayed thick. I tried to tell myself I must be getting close to something, that it had to end, that real spaces end. But the longer I walked, the more my thoughts became loose and strange, like my brain was sliding around inside my skull. I started having moments where I couldn't remember what I'd been thinking a second before. I started losing the thread of my own fear, then grabbing it again when the sense of being watched returned like a hand on my neck. I don't know if I slept. I don't know how I could have slept. My body was exhausted, But fear kept pouring adrenaline into me like gasoline on a fire. Every heartbeat renewed that dread. At some point, my feet began to bleed inside my boots. I could feel dampness with each step, could feel the sting when skin rubbed raw against fabric. I should have stopped. I should have sat down. I should have done anything except keep walking. But stopping felt like death. Turning around felt like death. So I walked, and then, finally, something changed. On the spotless tile floor ahead of me, there were boot prints, gray with dust, like someone had stepped out of one of the identical doorways and walked in a perfectly straight line down the center of the corridor. They stood out against the white like a stain. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. Proof of another person. Proof I wasn't trapped in a place that had never been touched. I moved closer, and my relief curdled into confusion. I knew that tread pattern. I'd worn those boots on hikes, on explorations. I'd stared at their soles while cleaning mud out of them. I knew their worn spots the way you know the scratches on your own car. They were my boot prints. My stomach went cold. I crouched slightly, staring, trying to make it make sense. Maybe someone had the same boots. They were common. Maybe, no. They were mine. And then I watched the prints begin to fade. Not quickly, not like a trick of the eye. Slowly, as if something invisible was wiping them away bit by bit, like a mop moving over them without making a sound. The gray dust lifted until the tile was white again. A loop, a cycle. All that time, however long it truly was, I had been walking in a straight line, convinced I couldn't turn back, only to end up where I started. Not like a twisted strip where ends meet, like a snake eating its own tail, consuming and renewing itself forever. The realization hit me with a strange calm, a numbness, like my fear had finally exhausted itself and left nothing behind but acceptance. I stopped. I turned around, and I saw it. It stood in the center of the corridor, exactly where the space felt emptiest, as if it had always belonged there. A dark figure, tall enough that its head nearly brushed the 10-foot ceiling. It had no face, no clear gender, no features that made it human in any comforting way. It was vaguely humanoid, only because it had a head, a torso, arms, legs. But the proportions were wrong. The limbs were too long and too thin. The back hunched like it was built under the wrong gravity. The chest looked sunken, the belly rounded and heavy. Its hands, its hands, looked like they had both too many fingers and not enough, like someone who didn't understand anatomy had tried to design hands from memory. It moved toward me, not with smooth steps, but with a jerking, unnatural motion, like a machine imitating a person, like flesh draped over bones made of sharp angles. I tried to step away, but my body didn't respond fast enough. My legs were ruined. My balance was gone. My muscles shook from exhaustion. And I tripped. I hated myself for it in a way that felt almost pure. The one moment I needed my body to work, it failed me. I went down hard, landing on my backside like a baby animal, helpless and stupid. The thing reached for me. When its fingers touched me, cold rushed through my skin. Not the cold of winter air or ice, but a deeper cold. The kind of cold you imagine space has. The absence of warmth, the absence of light, the absence of even the promise that warmth or light could exist again. My body locked up. My jaw wouldn't open. My throat wouldn't make sound. I couldn't scream, couldn't jerk away, couldn't even twist my head. It pulled me closer as if I were an object it had found and wanted to examine. Not with anger, not with hunger, with interest, with curiosity. I tried to look away. I wanted to, but my eyelids wouldn't close. It felt like my eyes were held open by force I couldn't fight. I couldn't control my body at all. I couldn't control anything. And then I understood in a sick, sinking way that I wasn't being attacked for a reason that made human sense. I wasn't being punished. I wasn't being hunted because I had done something wrong the way a person means wrong. I was being studied, taken apart and looked at, not with tools, but with a tension so heavy it felt physical, like my mind, myself, my very being was being opened, hollowed out, rearranged. Not because I was special, not because I was chosen, not because I was about to learn secret truths about the universe, but because something found me interesting the way I found abandoned buildings interesting. Because it didn't understand me and wanted to. Because it could. The feeling was unbearable. The corridor, the lights, the silence, the endless doors, the blank stores full of unlabeled boxes. It all felt like scenery built for this moment. Like the place existed to bring things like me to things like it. The abyss looked into me, and I had no choice but to stare back. Story 2. My state of mind isn't stable right now, and even asking myself this question feels like pushing on a bruise. Was everything worth it? Before championship wrestling promotions, I would have answered yes without thinking. I would have said the pain was part of the deal, that the struggle meant something, that the sacrifices were just the cost of chasing a dream. Now I don't know how to answer. I don't even know if the question makes sense anymore, because I'm not sure I'm the one who gets to decide what worth it means. In wrestling, everyone tells you the same thing when you're young. They say the toll is physical: torn ligaments, concussions, stitches, long drives, cheap hotels, bad food, sleepless nights and sore mornings. They talk about all of that like it's the whole story. Like if you can handle pain, you can handle the business. That's the lie they sell you. The damage doesn't stay in the ring. It doesn't end when the bell rings. It doesn't stop when you limp back through the curtain and sit in the locker room with an ice pack and a bottle of water. It follows you home. It follows you into your phone calls with family. It follows you into the quiet moments when you're alone and you can't drown it out with crowd noise. I was the youngest of 3 kids. Most nights it was just me and my siblings, Johnny and Allison, while our parents worked. My dad came home smelling like motor oil and cigarettes from the auto shop. My mom worked nights at the hospital, and sometimes she looked like she was made of exhaustion when she walked through the door. We didn't have much money, but we had enough. Food on the table, a roof over our heads, a routine we could count on. Back then, I thought normal life was something solid, something permanent. I didn't understand how fragile it was until Johnny died. I was 10 years old when I learned what it meant for the world to keep turning after it takes something from you. He was hit by a drunk driver. The driver fled the scene. They never found out who did it, and that part mattered almost as much as the death itself. There was no ending, no answer, no person to blame, no clear reason. Just an empty chair and a name that became dangerous to say out loud because it made everyone's eyes change. My parents hardly spoke in the days after. My dad sat in silence like every word would break him. My mom moved through the house like she was on autopilot, doing what needed to be done because the alternative was falling apart. Allison locked herself in her room and became a stranger behind a closed door. I didn't know what to do, so I did the only thing I could do. I kept moving. I went to school. I did my homework. I kept my head down. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't talk unless I had to. It wasn't a choice at first. It just happened, like a switch inside me flipped and stayed that way. By the time I was 16, it had gotten so bad that I couldn't do simple things without freezing. I couldn't order food. I couldn't speak into a drive-through speaker without feeling like someone was judging me, waiting for me to mess up, waiting to laugh. I would sit in my dad's pickup outside Burger King while Allison ordered for me. In my head, I would rehearse the same sentence again and again. Hi, can I get a number 3 with? And that's as far as I would get. The second I pictured my voice coming out wrong, or the person on the other end thinking I sounded stupid, my throat would lock. My chest would tighten. So Allison would do it. Then she'd tell me it was ready, and I'd drive forward and pick it up like there was nothing wrong with me. Looking back, I can see it for what it was. Grief that never found a place to go, and fear that grew in the space where my voice used to be. But at the time, I just thought I was broken in some way I couldn't explain. Then my dad got free tickets to a wrestling show from a customer at the shop. It was a Friday night in a small civic center, The kind of building that smells like popcorn and old concrete, with bright lights that make everything look a little too harsh. The moment we walked in, the place hit me like a wave. It was loud in a way I'd never experienced. Deafening. Alive. People were on their feet, yelling like it mattered, like what was happening in that ring was the most important thing in the world. And in that moment, it was. Whoever stood in that ring controlled the room. They were the center of the universe. I was locked in, not just watching, but feeling every cheer and boo like it was vibrating through my bones. Buckeye Bobby squared off with Atlas the Titan, and the crowd treated it like a war. When Buckeye Bobby took a chair shot to the head and blood spilled down his face, he didn't look scared. He looked like a man who could turn pain into power. The crowd lost their minds, and I did too, in my own quiet way. While I watched, I noticed a man sitting across the ring on the other side from us. He wasn't cheering. He wasn't booing. He didn't react like a normal fan. He was still as a statue, watching the match with this intense focus that made him seem separate from everyone around him. I nudged my dad and pointed. "Dad, who's that?" My dad barely looked. His eyes stayed on the ring. "Probably one of the promoters or something," he muttered like it wasn't important. I didn't push, but I couldn't stop noticing the man. When Buckeye Bobby went for an elbow drop, I glanced back across the ring. The man was gone. 1 second he was there, and the next he wasn't. I hadn't seen him stand up. I hadn't seen him move through the crowd. I scanned the seats and aisles, thinking maybe I just missed it, but there was no sign of him at all. I didn't see him again for the rest of the show, and by the time we drove home, I'd almost convinced myself I imagined him. But the feeling I got in that building didn't go away. That night gave me something I didn't have anymore. It gave me a focus, a want so strong, it felt like it could pull me out of my own head. Somewhere on the drive home, I decided I wanted to be in the middle of the ring. I wanted to matter. I wanted the world to have to look at me, listen to me, react to me. I wanted to be a wrestler. For months, it was all I could think about. The idea scared me and thrilled me at the same time. Eventually, I worked up the courage to tell my parents. The moment I said the words, "I want to be a wrestler," my dad lit up like I'd handed him hope. He was all for it, but my mom reacted like I'd said I wanted to join a cult. She wasn't about to let me get mixed up in wrestling nonsense, not after everything we'd already been through. That was the start of their constant arguing, the kind that drains you even when you're not part of it. My dad said I should figure out what kind of man I wanted to be. My mom insisted on a safer path, a real career, something that wouldn't leave me broken with nothing to show for it. Eventually, she gave in, but only on one condition. "You can pursue wrestling," she told me, "but only if you graduate. If you still want this after high school, I'll help you pay for wrestling school." I agreed immediately. I was so desperate to get in the ring that I would have agreed to almost anything. What I didn't understand then was that high school would be the easiest part of the whole story. After I graduated, I started training in a worn-down warehouse off Bischoff Street in Granbury. It didn't look like a dream factory. It looked like a place where dreams went to get beat up. There was no air conditioning, and in the summer, the heat sat on your shoulders like a punishment. The boards under the ring felt like they might collapse. The canvas was patched and scarred, like Frankenstein's skin stitched together from old pieces. Ugly, worn, real. It became my second home anyway. From sunrise to sundown, 6 days a week I trained until I threw up. I ran ropes until my lungs burned. I took bumps until my back felt like it was full of glass. I learned how to fall, how to breathe, how to move in a way that told a story. Every day I went home sore and exhausted and still went back the next morning. For the first time since Johnny died, I felt like I was building something instead of just surviving. One night I stayed after hours to get extra reps in. The building was quieter than usual. My trainer had stepped away and I sprinted back and forth between the ropes, threw myself into bumps, hit the mat, got up, did it again. The rhythm took over, and for a while I didn't think about anything except movement. That's when I noticed someone sitting outside the ring in a folding chair, watching me. It wasn't my trainer. It wasn't one of the other trainees. The man was sitting too still, too calm. When I tried to look directly at his face, his features didn't settle in my vision. It was like the shadows refused to let me see him clearly, like my eyes couldn't lock onto the details. My trainer suddenly shouted from ringside, "Are you going to keep going, or what?" I jumped, because I hadn't even heard him come out. I pointed toward the folding chair without thinking. "Don't you see him?" My trainer stared at me like I'd lost my mind. When I turned back, the chair was empty. My trainer's voice got sharper. "I'm not gonna wait for you to figure your shit out, Jeremy. Either get it together or hit the showers." I nodded and kept training. I pretended nothing happened. I told myself it was exhaustion, shadows, stress. I didn't think about it again for a long time because thinking about it felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. Eventually, I got cleared for my first matches, and I thought my life was finally about to begin. The excitement was real. I was going to prove myself. I was going to become someone. Then the promoter handed me my first gimmick name, Freezy McChill. I honestly thought it was a joke. I waited for him to laugh. He didn't. He told me I could be intimidating with a name like that, like it was obvious. I should have trusted my gut, but I was new. And in wrestling, you learn fast that you don't always get to choose. So I tried. I did my best to make it work. It didn't. I lost matches in minutes. I got laughed at night after night. People didn't boo me like a villain. They didn't cheer me like a hero. They laughed like I wasn't real. That kind of reaction eats you alive. After a while, I accepted the truth. Freezy McChill wasn't championship material. If I wanted to survive, I had to become someone else. I was driving on an interstate from Tulsa to St. Louis when I started writing down new character ideas. I needed someone strong, someone dangerous, someone that could own a room the way those wrestlers in that civic center had owned the crowd. I wanted a name that sounded like it had weight, like it had history. While I was thinking, Mr. Crowley came on the radio. I'd heard the song before, but that time it hit differently. The organ sounded ominous, like it was opening a door into something dark. It made me picture a man obsessed with the unknown, someone who played with things people shouldn't touch. That's how Mr. Allister was born. The first time I wrestled as Mr. Allister, it was under a circus tent in southern Illinois. The crowd was small, mostly family members, but I didn't care. When the opening notes of Mr. Crowley played, heads turned, eyes locked onto me. For the first time I felt it, the power of being seen, the power of being a character bigger than yourself. It was intoxicating. For years, I wrestled anywhere that would book me. Armories, VFW halls, high school gyms, half-empty buildings where the ring ropes were loose and the locker rooms smelled like mildew. The pay was $50 if I was lucky. Usually it was a hot dog and a handshake. I drove through snow and rain and heat waves, sleeping in my car sometimes, waking up stiff and hurting and still going. Once, on the way to North Dakota, I called my mom on my birthday and asked for gas money so I could make it to the next show. She helped me. She always helped when she could. But when I hung up, I sat in my car for a long time and stared at the steering wheel and thought about quitting. I didn't, but the thought was there. Wrestling fulfilled me. Nothing else made me feel alive. I wasn't doing it out of obligation. I believed my pain had purpose. Eventually, the grind paid off. I went from being an opener to being in main events. My name started to travel ahead of me. I learned that locker rooms were like libraries full of stories. Injuries, betrayals, promoters cheating guys out of pay, marriages falling apart. Some stories were just gossip, the kind you tell to pass the time. But some stories were told like warnings, like you were supposed to listen and learn without asking too many questions. It was in a cramped locker room in Kansas City when I first heard the name that would change everything. Keith the Kingpin walked up and patted me on the back. "Kid," he said, "did you see who was watching your match out there?" I forced a laugh because his tone made my skin prickle. What are you talking about? There's always people watching. A few of the other guys exchanged looks. Iron Mastodon spoke next, quieter. Mr. Hawkins, he made a surprise visit. I raised my eyebrows. CLWP? Big deal. What's the matter? Why is everybody acting like he's Freddy Krueger? Macho Malachi leaned back and shook his head. Because he's creepy as hell. Don't you know what happens when people get signed by CWP? How the hell am I supposed to know? Juggernaut Jarrett sat down next to me on the bench, elbows on his knees. Mr. Hawkins is a living legend, he said, eyes down like he didn't want to speak too loudly. If he's got his eye on you, you may or may not be living the dream soon. The dream, I repeated, reaching into my locker for my duffel bag. Jarrett added it like an afterthought, which made it worse. Depends what your definition of a dream is. Cobra Malone, fresh from the showers with a towel around his waist, cracked a grin like he was trying to cut the tension. Don't listen to them. It's just heebie-jeebie bullshit. No, it ain't, Jarrett shot back. Bad things happen to people at CWP. You ever feel like you're being watched out there? I shrugged, patting baby powder under my arms. When am I not? Cobra peeked from behind his locker door. My buddy Randy swears he's seen NASA photos of black holes that are brighter than that guy's eyes. I asked the question anyway. So what's supposed to happen if he chooses you? You get to live that dream you were talking about earlier. A few nights later, in the early hours of the morning, I got a phone call. I don't know why I answered. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the same feeling I had when I noticed the man across the ring as a kid. Something in me said, don't ignore this. This is Jeremy, I said. Silence. Long enough that I thought it was a wrong number. Right as I was about to hang up, a voice finally came through. I expected something more grandiose from Mr. Allister. Very funny. Who is this? How rude of me not to introduce myself. A light laugh came through the speaker. You may call me Mr. Hawkins. CWP? I've had my eye on you for a while, he said. You've got talent. I rubbed my eyes and swung my legs over the side of the bed. You always call talent this late to chit-chat. Only the ones I'm serious about, he said, and his voice got firmer. You shouldn't hesitate before answering the phone. Like he knew something he shouldn't. I stood up and turned the lights on, trying to shake off the cold feeling crawling up my spine. So what do you want to talk about? You and I both know sacrifices yield rewards for those who stick around long enough to see them, he said, comfortable, smooth, with that warm gravel you hear in people who sell dreams for a living. I leaned against the wall, ignoring the ache in my limbs. Are you talking about money? If you're concerned about money, don't worry. I'll write all sorts of zeros on your check, he said. I'm offering more than that. Consistent dates, primetime crowds, the opportunity of a lifetime. The offer made my head spin. I've got guys with better physiques than me, I said without thinking, trying to stay grounded. Guys who are reliable, clean, safe. Silence again, until I realized it wasn't silence. It was him waiting for me to keep talking. Why not them? I asked. Because none of them appear to be on the verge of becoming something greater, he said. You do. I pressed my forehead against the cool window pane and let his words sink in. For a second, I felt like I could breathe again, like someone was finally telling me I hadn't suffered for nothing. Then he asked a question that made my blood go cold. What are you looking at? I spun around, staring at my apartment like I expected to see someone in the corner. What did you just say? But he ignored my question completely, his tone sliding back into that smooth pitch. This isn't just a contract. This is a new opportunity. You've given everything to a sport that hasn't given much back. It's time for that to change, wouldn't you say? What are your terms? I asked, voice quieter now. There's got to be a catch. There are no catches, he said quickly. Too quickly. Everything is standard. Escalating pay over 5 years. Travel covered. Medical. Within reason. You'll have input on your character and your matches. I don't expect perfection, but I do expect results. It sounded perfect. It sounded like a door finally opening. If I say yes, I asked, "What's next?" "You won't regret anything," he said. "That's what's next." "Send the contract," I said. "I'll read it. You already have it," he replied. "I made sure it reached you." I frowned, gripping the phone tighter. "You don't know where I am. How would you have my address?" "I know enough," he said, and his voice crackled, thin and strange like a bad recording. I forced a nervous chuckle. "Overnight delivery, I'm guessing?" "It's in the room," he said. "You walked past it when you turned on the light. Check the desk. Left drawer." I stared at the phone for a full second, like it might ring again. Then I walked to the desk, heart hammering, and opened the left drawer. The contract was there. It wasn't folded. It wasn't crammed in. It was placed neatly, like it had been waiting. I should have called someone. I should have thrown it away. I should have asked how the hell it got into my apartment. But my brain did what it had always done. It moved forward. It focused on the goal and ignored the warning signs because the warning signs were inconvenient. When my contract with my previous promotion ended, I flew to Rhode Island to meet Mr. Hawkins at CWP headquarters. The receptionist barely looked up at me, just nodded toward an office down the hall. The building felt too clean, too quiet, like a place where people didn't linger. I walked down the hall and stepped into his office. He was sitting behind the desk, perfectly still, wearing a charcoal suit that seemed to pull the light toward it. There was something about him that made the room feel colder, without any actual change in temperature. "I was wondering when you'd arrive," he said with a grin. His eyes tracked me with the cold precision of a shark. He didn't need to introduce himself. I knew who he was, not only from reputation, but from memory. He was the man I'd seen across the ring when I was a kid, and he looked exactly the same. No gray hair, no wrinkles, no sign that time had moved at all. My mouth went dry. I tried not to show it. I looked down at the last page of the contract on the desk between us. My name was printed at the bottom, crisp and pristine, waiting for my signature. I had built confidence over the years. I had learned how to walk into any room like I belonged. But in that office, with him sitting there smiling like he'd been expecting me for my entire life, I felt small again. I felt like a kid at a drive-through speaker, unable to speak. I should have asked questions. I should have walked out. I didn't. This was what I'd worked for. I couldn't throw it away. I held the pen over the line with an unsteady hand for what felt like forever, then signed my name. I left his office right after, like my body knew it needed distance. That weekend, I went home to celebrate with my family. On the drive, I practiced how I'd tell them, but every version sounded like a wrestling promo, like I couldn't talk like a normal person anymore. It didn't matter. They were proud. Everyone except my mom. She said the right words. She smiled, but her eyes were heavy with something else. I wish she'd tried harder to hide it, because seeing it made my chest ache. Saying goodbye never gets easier, and she looked like she was already mourning me, even though I was standing right there. Then I went where I'd always wanted to be, and I carried that look with me. At first, CWP felt like the start of something extraordinary. I feuded with guys like Atomic Angus Punk, Raging Ragin, the Mortician. They pushed me. They made me better. The crowds were bigger, the lights brighter, the cameras always waiting. The opportunities came fast. So did the injuries. Matches got harder, more demanding. There were nights I could barely stand after, nights where my joints felt loose, like they didn't fit together properly anymore. But no matter what happened, I was always cleared by the next show. I told myself it was because CWP took care of its talent. I told myself it was proof they believed in me. Now I understand I was confusing survival with success. The sleepless nights from pain felt justified as long as my star rose. I stayed focused on being Mr. Allister, on being the momentum. I didn't stop to think about what it was costing me to keep going. I truly understood the cost the night I wrestled my first televised match for CWP. Before my match against Thanatos, I paced in the locker room in my ring gear, working on my breathing, imagining the match beat by beat. This was it, the moment I'd been chasing for years. Then my phone buzzed inside my locker like an angry insect. When I saw my mom's name on the screen, my stomach tightened. She didn't call this late. Not like this. Not right before a match. "Hey," I answered, trying to sound normal. "My match is coming up soon. Are you and Dad going to watch?" Jeremy, her voice was fragile, like she was holding something back. "What's wrong?" I heard the crowd react to something out in the arena, a loud pop that shook the walls. It almost made me miss what she said next. "It's your Uncle Dale." My throat went tight. "What about him?" "He passed this afternoon," she said, and the words fell heavy. For a second, my brain didn't take it in. Then it did, and the room spun slightly, like my body didn't know where to put the information. "How?" I stammered. "It was a heart attack," she said, and I could hear her crying. I leaned against the wall and stared at my reflection in a dark TV screen across the room. For a moment, I didn't look like myself. I looked like someone wearing my skin. "I just wanted you to hear it from me," she said. Before too much time passed, more cheers rose from the arena. All I managed was, "Yeah, I know tonight's important," she continued. "Uncle Dale would be so proud. You don't have to." "No," I cut in. "I'm good." A pause. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," I lied. "I'm sure." "Okay," she whispered. "Please be safe." "Will do, Mom. I love you." I didn't have time to process. A producer shouted from the other side of the locker room door, "Alistair, you're up in 5. I told myself it was terrible timing, a cruel coincidence. Then I walked out there and did my job. I didn't have time to be Jeremy. I had to be Mr. Alistair. After that, life and wrestling blended into one long stretch of motion. House shows, TV, flights, drives, ice baths, painkillers, crowds, silence. I kept going, hoping the chase for the next great moment would be as good as the catch. But the more I chased the spotlight, the more life seemed to hit me back. The night my grandma's house burned down, I beat Rex Riot for the Intercontinental Championship. The week Allison lost her battle with cancer, I became #1 contender for the world title. Every step forward in the ring cost me something outside of it. At first, I tried to accept it like a man, like it was just the way life worked. Then acceptance became avoidance, painkillers, booze, bad habits, anything to keep my head quiet. Nothing worked for long. The more I spiraled, the less I called home. Phone calls became something I postponed until it felt too late. Eventually, I stopped thinking in days and weeks. I measured time by matches and storylines, by what city I was in and who I was working with. I wanted to quit more times than I'll admit, but CWP always gave me just enough to stay. Another program, another tease, another promise, another check, another reason. It was a vicious cycle, and it finally caught up to me when I won the CWAP World Heavyweight Championship. I'd been chasing that belt my entire career. When the night came, I thought it would define me in the best way. It didn't. The lights dropped to deep indigo as the opening organ notes of Mr. Crowley rolled through the arena. The crowd erupted when I stepped through the curtain. Signs swayed above the barricades. Camera flashes popped like fireflies in a storm. Those first steps down the ramp never stopped feeling big, because the fans don't let you forget what it means. Hundreds of voices chanted my name as I walked. In the ring, Dominic the Basilisk paced like a caged animal. His chestnut hair was messy and damp with sweat, and he tossed it back with a cocky flick like he owned the place. He played the crowd perfectly, taunting them, drawing heat, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He made them hate him, and that made them love the fight. Our feud was the biggest story in the company, and this match was supposed to be the payoff. Months of build, months of anger, all leading to this. Everything was exactly how it should have been, until I noticed a teenager near the barricade. Fans stare all the time. It comes with the job. But this kid's eyes felt empty, lifeless. Like he wasn't watching for entertainment, like he was watching because he was waiting for something. I turned slightly to acknowledge that side of the crowd, still playing my role. He was gone. I told myself it was nerves. I kept walking. When I got closer to the ring, I saw him again, but this time he was only a few feet away from me. Too close. Close enough that security should have been on him immediately. I looked around for a guard. No one reacted. No one even looked at him. And then my blood turned to ice, because I recognized him. Curly brown hair, blue and black flannel, navy jeans. The outfit he was buried in. It was Johnny. My brother's face twisted into a grimacing smile. My body went cold and stiff, and my mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Grief, stress, sleep deprivation, anything. But he looked as real as the ring steps, as real as the crowd, as real as my own hands. My pyro went off. The blast made me blink. When my eyes opened, he was gone. My feet felt like they were filled with concrete, but I forced myself forward. When I reached the steel steps, the crowd was shaking the building with chants. Alistair, Alistair, Alistair. I let them think my hesitation was part of the act. I climbed the steps, stepped through the ropes, and took my corner while the announcer started the introductions. The referee stepped between Dominic and me, giving the usual instructions, but I barely heard him. My eyes drifted to the corner behind the ref. Johnny was sitting on the turnbuckle staring at me. His face sagged like wet paper. His neck looked broken, and the flesh dripped down it in a slow, viscous way that made my stomach flip. The bell rang with a sharp metallic sound. Dominic charged and took me down hard. We rolled, trading punches like we'd planned. I shoved him off, hit the ropes, and leveled him with a lariat. He popped up fast. We locked up, testing strength, crowd reacting, everything moving the way it should. Then I felt hands on me that weren't Dominic's. Ice cold. I recoiled, and it threw the timing off. Dominic's face tightened with irritation, and he hissed under his breath. "What are you doing?" "Shoot me into the ropes," I whispered back, trying to keep it together. "I'll break the headlock." We worked through it. Elbows. Escape. He whipped me. I hit the ropes. Johnny was on the apron. His jaw hung unhinged like a snake. His mouth stretched too wide, and the shape of it didn't look human anymore. My momentum faltered. I stumbled on the rebound, just enough for Dominic to have to improvise. He hit an arm drag that looked awkward because I was out of position. We landed with a flat, embarrassing plop that made the crowd groan. A real groan, the kind you feel like a slap. "Get it together," Dominic hissed. I dragged myself up, selling the move, trying to recover. I bounced off the ropes, ducked a clothesline, hit a body splash. The ref counted. 1. Dominic kicked out fast, and the crowd came back to life. We found a rhythm again, trading holds and counters, working like we were supposed to. For a few minutes, I almost believed it was okay. Then Dominic called a spot during a headlock. Irish whip into a boot. I powered out, grabbed his wrist, we rose. He whipped me. As I came back, Dominic suddenly threw himself backward like I'd hit him with something I hadn't even done. I stopped short, confused. For a split second, I thought maybe I forgot the next beat. Maybe I blanked. Maybe the pressure was finally catching up. I reached down and shoved him under the bottom rope, following him outside to try to salvage it. I threw a few worked punches to his back. Dominic chopped me stiffly in the chest, guiding me toward the steel steps. He lifted me and slammed me into them. Pain flared through my ribs, real and sharp, and the ref started the 10 count. Dominic rolled me back in, and we got to another sequence we had rehearsed. I whipped him into the corner. I charged for a splash. Halfway across the ring, I stopped dead. The canvas was split open. a gaping hole like the ring had been torn apart from underneath. I looked down, and under the torn mat I saw dirt, and beneath the dirt I saw a casket. Johnny's casket. When I looked up, there was a tombstone behind Dominic. Johnny's name was carved into it. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I backed into the corner, sweat stinging my eyes. The crowd was still chanting and pounding the barricades, hungry for the moment, completely unaware of what was happening in my head and in front of my eyes. The ref came over to check on me. I waved him off. Then I felt a presence perched above me on the top turnbuckle. "Do you miss us?" The voice didn't come from the crowd. It didn't come from the ring. It came from inside my skull, like someone had leaned close to my ear from the inside. "What?" I whispered, looking up. Allison was there. She loomed over me, face inches from mine. Her hair hung in tangled strands like black vines, covering parts of her face. Her eyes were bloodshot, not sick, not weak, just furious and empty. Dominic's voice cut through it. "Who the hell are you talking to?" But the dread didn't go away. It thickened. It wrapped around my thoughts like wet cloth. From there, it fell apart fast. I botched spots left and right. I missed marks I'd drilled for years. Every time I looked away and looked back, something was wrong again. Dominic's frustration grew obvious, and I knew I was making him look bad too. The closer we got to the finish, the more panicked I became, and the more my body refused to cooperate. I dropped Dominic with a pile driver and went to cover him. The lights went out. Total darkness like the world had been unplugged. Then a deep crimson glow seeped in, thick and suffocating. And in that red light, I saw something standing across from me in the ring. A monstrous figure. It moved slowly, not like a wrestler, not like a person. It stepped forward and stopped only a few feet from me. The crowd roared because they thought it was a big angle, the kind of surprise they pay to see. I tried to square up, to posture, to play along like it was part of the show, because I didn't know what else to do. Then the light hit its face. Its skin was stretched tight over its skull like it might rip. Its eyes weren't eyes, just shallow dents like someone had pressed thumbs into clay. Beneath them, slick mandibles twitched, shining with strands of saliva. Its body looked overbuilt, unnaturally muscled, and every movement sent tremors through it like something inside was trying to get out. I couldn't move. My lungs wouldn't work right. I could hear the crowd screaming, but it sounded far away. The figure took another step. Something in me snapped. My fear turned into pure survival. Instead of a worked punch, I threw a real one. The impact jolted my arm. The thing teetered backward. The crowd popped like I'd just done the coolest thing in the world. They had no idea I was fighting for my life. The canvas shifted under my boots. I glanced down and saw a shape moving beneath the mat, like something slithering under the surface. It moved under me and vanished. Then Dominic screamed. The sound ripped the truth into the open. There was no monster. I had punched Dominic for real. I'd smashed his nose open. Blood poured down his face as the ref jumped between us, getting instructions through his earpiece. I saw the ref's eyes, wide and urgent. We were going home early. I did what I had to do. I hit the DDT, pushed through the finish, and covered Dominic. I hooked his leg with hands that shook so badly I could barely hold on. 1, 2, the entire crowd held their breath. 3, the bell rang. Over and over. And the announcer boomed. "Here is your winner and the new CWP heavyweight champion, Mr. Alistair." The arena exploded in cheers. The ref handed me the belt. I raised it over my head, forcing a celebration because the cameras were on me and the crowd needed their moment. To them, I'd achieved my dream. But as I stood there holding that championship, I could still feel something moving under the ring, like the whole structure was breathing. Dominic rolled out to the floor, pressing a towel to his face, blood still running in a steady stream. When I lowered the belt, he was leaning against the barricade, staring at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. We both knew the match had been a disaster, and the look he gave me said it clearly. I may have won, but this wasn't over. I don't remember much about the walk back through the curtain. People swarmed me with congratulations. Hands slapped my shoulders. Someone shoved a water bottle into my hand. I heard a crew member say it was one of the most unpredictable finishes they'd ever seen. That word stuck with me. Unpredictable. Because that's a clean, safe word for something much uglier. Losing control of yourself in front of thousands of people. When I got to Gorilla, Dominic was already there, still bleeding. The towel against his face was soaked through. He locked eyes with me and stepped right into my space. "What the fuck was that?" he spat. "Were you trying to go into business for yourself out there?" Over his shoulder, Mr. Hawkins stood by the monitors. He hadn't moved. While everyone else rushed around, he stayed perfectly still, watching like this was exactly what he expected. Dominic kept going, furious. "I'm talking to you." Before I could answer, Mr. Hawkins spoke without raising his voice. Give him the chance to speak. My ears were ringing like an explosion had gone off beside my head. The images of Johnny, Allison, the hole in the mat, the red light, all of it stuck to my mind like tar. "No," I said, forcing the words out. "That wasn't... I didn't mean for it. There was something out there. Didn't you see it?" Dominic let out a cold laugh. "The only thing I saw was an inflated ego. I'm serious," I insisted, grabbing his wrist before he could turn away. "There was a monster. You have to believe me." "Yeah, and I'm Peter fucking Pan," he snapped, yanking his arm away. "Get the hell out of here with that bullshit." He brushed past me, leaving a thin trail of blood droplets on the floor. Mr. Hawkins waited until Dominic was gone, then stepped closer like he'd been waiting for the moment to become private. "You and I," he said calmly, "let's talk in my office." I followed him down the corridor away from the noise. With every step, the chaos of Gorilla faded until it felt like it had never existed. By the time we reached his office, the arena might as well have been a different world. The silence was complete. He sat down like he'd never been rattled in his life. "You did well out there," he said. I shook my head. "That was the worst match of my career, and you know it. I saw a crowd on their feet. I saw you crowned champion. That was your moment. You should be celebrating." "To hell with what the crowd thinks," I said, and my voice shook. Something was in the ring with us. I saw it. "And what exactly did you see?" he asked. "My brother and my sister," I said. "They died. They were there. And there was a monster. That's why I hit Dominic. I'm seeing things. Why?" He repeated the word like it amused him. "Why, you've stepped into the ring countless times and given people a reason to believe in you. Why are you questioning that now?" "I'm questioning you," I shot back. "What the hell is this place?" "This place," he said, and his voice felt like cold mist settling in the room, "is exactly what you wanted it to be. Home. My family, bad things keep happening to my family. Loss has a way of refining people," he said, detached, like he was talking about business numbers. "It clears away the unnecessary." I stared at him. "You know all about loss, huh?" "Actually," he said, "I do. It's in your contract." My stomach dropped. I thought of Johnny, Uncle Dale, Allison, all the holes that had been punched through my life. "Are you saying..." My voice cracked. "Are you saying you made that part of the deal?" "What I'm saying," he replied, leaning forward, "is there is always a price, in business and in life. This is what you signed up for. Did you forget?" "I didn't agree to that," I said. "You agreed to what sustains the life you live now." "You're talking about my family like they're expendable." He folded his arms, calm as ever. "Aren't they? You've certainly treated them that way." "That's not true." "No?" He stood and began to pace, slow, controlled. "What about the missed phone calls? The empty promises?" My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Because he wasn't wrong. Not completely. He stopped pacing and looked at me. "What if you walk away from this?" I asked, forcing the question out. He laughed quietly, like I'd said something naive. You won't. And he was right. A few days later, my mom called me while I was in a hotel room before a show in Florida. My dad had a stroke. He didn't last long after. I didn't react at first, not because I didn't care, because I didn't know how to be a person anymore. I just sat there staring at the championship belt laid across the bed, its gold catching the light like a cruel joke. My dad had been my biggest supporter. He'd been proud of me when I couldn't even be proud of myself. And now he was gone. After the funeral, my mom told me I didn't have to go back. She told me I'd already proved myself. When I asked what she meant, she said, "You've given everything to everyone but yourself. I don't want to lose you to something that can't love you back." The doors weren't open yet. The building was mostly empty. I figured I'd warm up and get my head right. I tried to focus on matched spots, on breathing, on routine. That's when I heard chanting. Not from the crowd, because there was no crowd. It came from somewhere inside the building, rhythmic and steady, like a heartbeat. Alistair, Alistair, Alistair. In the ring stood a cluster of local trainees and jobbers, shoulder to shoulder. Under the yellowish lights, their bodies twitched and spasmed like they weren't fully in control of their muscles. Their mouths moved in time with the chanting, but their eyes looked blank. The chant grew louder, and with it, the ring began to tremble. The canvas bloated in uneven pulses like something under it was pushing up from below. The ropes contracted and expanded with each throb, like the ring itself was breathing. Then a huge, pale hand punched up through the mat. Its fingers were long and thick, dripping with slime that looked wrong, like rotting glue. The smell hit me even from behind the curtain, sharp and sour. Inside my head, voices layered over each other, some screaming, some begging. "Go," cried the living mouths that still knew fear. "Stay," begged the dead ones, rasping like they remembered pain. The hand grabbed the nearest man by the ankle. He didn't move. He didn't scream. He didn't even react like he understood what was happening. The hand yanked, and his body cracked against the mat as he was dragged down. The ring swallowed him with a hollow, wet splash. Then there were sounds beneath the ring, sounds that made my stomach turn. Crunching, tearing, wet sloshing like meat being pulled apart. More shapes rose under the canvas. More hands. One by one, the trainees were dragged under. Each disappearance was fast and brutal, and yet none of them fought. None of them ran. They just went like they were being collected. All around me, I heard a roar of voices like a full arena, even though every seat was empty. "Thank you, Alistair! Thank you, Alistair!" When the last man vanished, the light steadied. The chanting stopped. The ring became still and normal again, like it had never moved. I stood frozen, barely breathing. A production crew member walked up behind me and nearly bumped into me. "Hey," he said, giving me a strange look. "You're early." I stared at him, then at the ring, trying to keep my face under control. "Where are the trainees?" I asked carefully. "Weren't they here earlier?" He shrugged like it was nothing. "They're probably running behind. They'll get here soon." If I told the truth, I'd be labeled delusional. I'd be sent to doctors. I'd be treated like a problem. And whatever this was, whatever lived under that ring or behind those lights, it would still be there, and I'd be alone with it. That night, after my match, even after I did business and went through the motions, I couldn't shake the image of that pale hand. I couldn't shake the sounds. Back at Gorilla, Mr. Hawkins was waiting by the monitors like he always was. I didn't ease into it. I didn't try to be polite. I went straight at him. "I want out," I said. "I want out of my contract. I don't know how you did it, but you're not going to scare me into staying." Hawkins smiled like I'd just told him a joke. "Do you really think leaving will change anything?" "I'm not scared of you," I lied, because my voice was shaking. He adjusted his cufflinks like this was casual. "You're a terrible liar," he said. "You've always been scared. That's why you were put on this path. Why did you seek me out?" I asked. "Why me?" He said my real name softly, like he enjoyed it. Jeremy. Do you really believe there was ever a version of your life where we didn't meet? After that, everything changed at CWP. Creative had planned a long reign for me. All of it vanished overnight. I lost the belt clean to Dominic in a rematch that lasted seconds. And after that, I dropped down the card like someone had cut the rope holding me up. Cheers turned to booze, and booze turned to something worse. Silence. Like the crowd didn't care if I existed, and yet I'm still here. I still walk into that ring and pretend everything is normal. I do business. I hit my marks. I keep my head down. I try to be boring. I try not to be noticed. Because I don't want to be taken by whatever is under that ring, whatever is inside this place, whatever Mr. Hawkins has been feeding, if there are any wrestlers, staff, production people, or fans who can back up anything I've seen. I need you now more than ever. I need to know I'm not alone in this. I need to know this is real. Because if it is, then it means the dream I chased wasn't a dream at all. I have to go. My match is about to start. If I don't come back, don't let them tell you this place is just wrestling. Don't let them clean it up with a press release and a tribute video. Don't let them turn it into another story that gets laughed off in a locker room. I'll respond as soon as I can, if I can. Godspeed. Story 3. It's been a while now since it all started, since the photos began showing up in my apartment, taped and pinned in places I couldn't ignore. At first, they didn't seem connected. Just random Polaroids with dim lighting and angles that didn't show much. A corner of a room, a blurry stretch of wall. Part of a hallway that could have been anywhere. They looked harmless in the way a bad photo looks harmless, like someone had taken them by accident. But even the first time I found one, a heavy feeling settled in my stomach because the photo itself wasn't the problem. The problem was what it meant. Someone had been inside my apartment, not outside my building, not near my door. Inside, close enough to touch my things and decide where I would notice them. Close enough to take their time. The first few appeared in places that felt almost playful, like a sick prank. One was taped to the bathroom mirror at eye level, so I saw it the second I looked up while brushing my teeth. Another was stuck to the corner of my television screen like a sticky note. A couple more hung in my hallway, dangling from thin threads that swayed gently whenever my air vent kicked on. I'd walk past them and they'd move slightly, turning as if they were trying to catch the light. Each time I found a new one, I stood there longer than I wanted to. My mind would spin through possibilities: break-in, stalker, neighbor with a spare key, maintenance, someone from the building who'd watched me and decided I was an easy target. I checked my locks, I checked my windows, I even checked the vents once, which made me feel ridiculous. But I did it anyway. I told myself that I must have missed something simple, that there had to be a normal explanation. Still, the photos kept appearing. I started collecting them in a shoebox, not because it made me feel safer, but because I didn't know what else to do. Throwing them away felt wrong. Like the moment I did, I'd be admitting I didn't have proof, admitting it was all in my head. And I didn't want to give up the only solid thing I had, the physical evidence that something was happening. Most of the photos were hard to make sense of. Some were too dark. Some looked like they were taken through something, like a curtain or a doorway barely cracked open. A few of them were so close to a surface that they were almost abstract, just grainy color and shadows. Then I found the one that truly shook me. It wasn't in the bathroom. It wasn't on the TV. It wasn't dangling in the hallway like bait. It was in my bedroom. I woke up one morning to my alarm blaring, the same sound I'd heard 1,000 times. I rolled over onto my back, still half asleep, blinking at the ceiling while my brain tried to catch up with the day. And that's when I saw it. A Polaroid photo, nailed into the ceiling above my bed. For a moment, I just stared at it, confused in that sleepy way where you know something is wrong, but you can't immediately figure out why. Then my stomach turned cold as I realized what I was looking at. It wasn't just another random photo. It was something I recognized. I sat up so fast my sheets tangled around my legs. Then I climbed onto my mattress on my knees and stood on my tiptoes, stretching my arms up as far as they'd go. My shoulders cramped from reaching. My fingertips finally brushed the edge of the photo. When I pulled, it didn't slide out gently like tape would. It tore. I came down awkwardly onto the bed, clutching two ripped pieces of the photo, my heart hammering as if I'd just caught someone in the act. My hands shook while I tried to line the pieces up again, like a puzzle, like evidence after a crime. When the picture came together, a chill ran down my spine so strong, it almost made me nauseous. It was my bedroom door. The photo had been taken from the hallway, facing my bedroom door with the lights in the apartment completely off. The only illumination was the harsh white flash of the camera, freezing the doorway in the dark, like a spotlight. The rest of the hallway behind it disappeared into blackness. Whoever took it had been standing there in the dark, pointing the camera straight at my door. At my room. At me. I held it for a long time, staring down at it like the longer I looked, the more it would explain itself. But it didn't explain anything. It only made everything worse. Someone had been there while I slept. Someone had been close enough to my room to take a photo and not worry about being caught. I could feel my thoughts speeding up, tumbling over each other. I tried to think in a straight line. What to do first, who to call, how to make it stop. But panic isn't organized. It just spreads. In the end, I did the only thing I'd been doing. I put the photo into the box with the others, shut the lid, and sat there staring at it like it might start moving. That night, I took extra precautions. I checked the front door over and over. Deadbolt, latch, chain, until my fingers hurt from touching metal. I checked the windows again, even though I knew they were locked. Then I dragged a chair into my bedroom and wedged it under the door handle like a barricade. It wasn't clever, it wasn't foolproof, but it was something physical I could do with my hands, and that made me feel slightly less helpless. I slept with a knife under my pillow. Even that didn't make me feel brave. It made me feel like someone in a movie who was about to die early. Still, when I turned off the light, I couldn't stop imagining the sound of the lock turning. Couldn't stop imagining a hand on the knob. When sleep finally came, it didn't bring rest. It brought nightmares, vivid, sick ones, that felt like they were being fed directly into my head. In every version of the dream, I was frozen in my bed, barely able to move, and a dark figure stood over me. A man-shaped shadow. I could never see his face clearly, but I could always see the curve of his smile, and in his hands was a camera, held up close to my face, the flash going off again and again and again. I woke up early the next morning, soaked in sweat, breathing hard. My shirt was off. I didn't even remember taking it off. For a second, I just lay there listening. The apartment was quiet. No footsteps, no voices. Just the low, normal sounds of the building, pipes ticking, ventilation humming, the distant groan of settling walls. I turned my head and immediately saw the first thing that was wrong. The chair I'd jammed under the handle had been moved. Not knocked over, not broken, not shoved aside in a panic. It had been slid away neatly, and it was resting on the opposite side of my bedroom, like someone had moved it with care. Then my eyes found the knife. It wasn't under my pillow anymore. It was stuck in the wall near my nightstand, embedded deep enough that the blade looked like it belonged there. The tip of it had been driven through a fresh Polaroid photograph, pinning the photo to the wall like a message. I got out of bed slowly, as if one sudden movement might trigger something else. My hands felt numb as I reached for the photo. I didn't pull the knife out. I couldn't. I just slid the picture free as carefully as I could. What I saw made my throat tighten. The photograph showed a long arm reaching out from the darkness, a hand gripping my shirt tightly. The angle was close, like whoever took it had been right beside me. The flash lit the fabric and the fingers, and the rest of the frame fell into shadow. I couldn't see a face, but I didn't need to. The message was clear. Someone had been in my room, and they wanted me to know it. The photo shook in my hands, My heart pounded so loudly it filled my ears. I tried to think about calling the police, but that thought hit a wall almost immediately. I couldn't go to the police. Not after the last time. Not after the way they'd looked at me when I tried to explain what happened during my incident. The one that had already put my mental health on record. The one that made them treat me like I was wasting their time. The memory of it still burned. The polite smiles, the sideways glances, the way their questions shifted from "what happened" to "are you sure?" I didn't have it in me to be doubted again while someone was clearly playing games in my home. So all I had was myself. I walked through the apartment room by room, forcing myself to check everything, even though I didn't want to. I opened closets. I pulled back shower curtains. I looked under the sink. I even pressed my ear to the walls and stood there listening, holding my breath like I might hear another person breathing on the other side. Nothing. Only silence and the steady, ordinary sounds of the building. That night, I did more than wedge a chair under the handle. I dragged nearly every piece of furniture in my bedroom in front of the door. My desk, a small dresser, a heavy storage bin I usually kept in the closet. I pushed and shoved until my arms ached and my palms were raw, building a barricade like I was preparing for a siege. When I finally crawled into bed, I didn't feel safe. I felt trapped. There's a difference. Safety is when you believe you're protected. Trapped is when you believe something can still reach you, but you've limited your own ways out. Sleep came in short, broken pieces. Every time I drifted off, I snapped awake again. Sure, I'd heard something. The smallest sounds, air through vents, pipes shifting, made my body jolt as if a hand had touched my shoulder. When morning came, I opened my eyes slowly, bracing myself before I even moved. The first thing I saw was the barricade. My bed was still shoved against the door. The desk was still there. The other furniture remained in place, exactly as I'd left it. Relief washed over me so strongly I almost laughed. For one brief second, I felt stupid and grateful at the same time. Stupid for being this scared, grateful that maybe I'd finally stopped it. Then I noticed something on the floor. To the right of my bed, sitting neatly as if it had been placed with intention, was a Polaroid camera. Not one of my things, not something I owned. A real camera, old and blocky, with that familiar square mouth at the front. And sticking out of that mouth was a fresh photograph, half dejected like a tongue. My mouth went dry. I stared at it for a long time before I reached down. My hand moved slowly, like I was afraid the camera would snap shut on my fingers. The photo was stiff and cool when I pulled it free. I held it close, not breathing, waiting for the image to fully reveal itself. When I finally looked at it, it felt like the room stopped. There I was, in my own bed, wide awake, staring straight at the camera. My mouth was stretched into a smile that didn't look like mine. It looked too wide, too forced, like my face had forgotten how to be human and guessed. My eyes were open, but there was nothing in them. No fear, no awareness, just emptiness, like someone had turned the lights off behind them. The angle made it clear the photo had been taken from inside my room, close to my bed, close enough that the flash would have lit my face. Close enough that if I'd been truly awake, I would have seen whoever was holding the camera. I let out a long breath that sounded like it came from someone else. Not again, I whispered to the empty room. The words slipped out before I could stop them, heavy with a tired kind of dread, like I was naming something I didn't want to admit. My hands moved on their own as I took the photo and placed it carefully into the box with the others. I didn't crumple it. I didn't rip it. I didn't throw it across the room. I treated it gently, like it was fragile, like it was proof of something that would fall apart if I handled it wrong. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the camera on the floor. The furniture was still barricading the door. The locks were still locked. Nothing was broken. Nothing looked forced. So either someone had done all of this without leaving a trace, or I had. A promise formed in my mind, not because it made me feel better, but because I didn't know how much longer I could live inside this question. I promised myself that if I ever caught myself slipping like this again, If I ever woke up with another photo that made no sense, I would take everything I'd collected, the whole box, all the evidence, and I would bring it straight to my psychiatrist. Not to ask for comfort, not to ask to be told it's stress, to ask one thing I'm terrified to hear answered out loud. Because whatever this is, I can feel it getting closer. And that meeting is not one I'm looking forward to. Story 4. Dust drifted across the road outside the diner window, rolling in slow waves like the highway itself was trying to erase the tracks of anything that passed through. The diner was one of those lonely places that feels like it exists for truckers and ghosts. Half-lit, quiet, with a few booths that never seem to be used, and a counter that holds more silence than conversation. When I came back from the bathroom, my table was empty. Not empty in the normal way, like someone had cleared a plate or taken away a cup. Empty like nobody had been there at all. The air felt undisturbed, like the last few minutes hadn't happened. My bill was still on the table, weighted by something small and metallic. I stopped walking. For a second, I couldn't move, like my body was waiting for my brain to explain what I was seeing. Then I stepped closer, slow and careful, and my fingers shook as I reached out. A single bullet sat on top of the receipt. I knew it before I even touched it. I didn't need to read anything, didn't need context, didn't need proof. My hand hovered, then closed around it. The metal was cool and heavy, the tip different from an ordinary round. My throat tightened as I realized I'd been holding my breath. My hand wouldn't stop trembling. Whoever left it there was gone, long gone. I'd only been in the bathroom a few minutes, but the diner was quiet, and when I turned my head in a sharp scan of the room, I saw no one who looked like they'd been near my booth. No sudden movement, no guilty faces, no server pretending not to stare. Nothing. It wasn't a warning in the way people imagine warnings. It wasn't a note with an explanation. It was something worse. Proof. Proof that I wasn't alone. Proof that I'd been found. Proof that this wasn't finished. It wasn't over. Not even close. I sat down slowly, still holding the bullet, and forced myself to act normal. I placed it in my palm under the table like a magician hiding a coin. I set my wallet on the receipt, paid my bill, and took a sip of my coffee out of reflex. It was cold, bitter, stale, like it had been poured hours ago. But the thing I remembered most clearly wasn't the taste. It was the warmth I'd felt days ago, feverish and alive, when I'd placed something upright on a table and stared at it until my thoughts turned liquid. The warmth of purpose. The warmth of a hunt. My mind slid backward to where it all started, the way it does when you're trying to make sense of something that won't fit inside the rules of normal life. I'd arrived near the truck stop outside cabin reach alone, my pickup humming as I turned off the main road. The tires kicked up a cloud of gray dirt that drifted behind me like smoke. Out there, the land was wide and empty in a way that makes you feel exposed. The sky looked bigger than it should. Even the sunlight felt thin. The truck stop itself was barely a truck stop. There were a few pumps and a small diner and, nearby, a decaying tourist trap that looked like it had been built to catch passing curiosity decades ago and had been dying slowly ever since. A sign promised wonder, mystery, local history. Anything that might make someone stop. I stopped, I crossed the road and walked up to it, and when I pushed the front door open, it hit a bell that sounded like it hadn't been used in a long time. The ring wasn't bright. It was tired, like metal that had forgotten how to sing. Inside, the place was dim and cluttered. Taxidermy animals stared from shelves and corners with glass eyes that caught the little light there was. Old circus promotional posters clung to the walls in faded reds and yellows, the smiling faces on them warped by time. There were cheap little souvenirs, too. Keychains, magnets, postcards, and a strange amount of Kokopelli merchandise, like someone had decided that was the only symbol tourists would recognize out here. I stood in the entrance for a full minute without seeing another living soul. I listened. The building creaked. Something shifted in the back. Not quite footsteps yet, more like the sound of someone getting up from a chair after sitting too long. Then I heard the soft shuffle of someone who lived in the connected apartment behind the shop. A bead curtain parted in the shadowed hallway, and an old person emerged slowly. They didn't rush. They didn't act surprised. They took one look at me and seemed to understand immediately that I wasn't there for a souvenir. "You've heard about the killings?" they asked. I nodded. "And you're not one of the UFO hunters," they continued, studying me in a way that felt like they were listening with more than their ears. "Not you. You're something else entirely. The sheriff isn't going to like you." They nodded like they'd expected that answer too, and then gestured toward a cot tucked into the corner, as if they'd been preparing for exactly this kind of visitor. "It's late," they said. "Honor me by sleeping here tonight, and tomorrow morning I'll guide you into town." I didn't like the idea of sleeping in a place filled with dead-eyed animals and stale air, but I also knew traveling at night out there wasn't smart. The land around Cabin Reach didn't feel empty. It felt avoided the way a dog avoids a yard where it once got hurt. So I waited until the old person went back to their early rest. Then I took off my boots and lay on the cot. Outside, coyotes howled. The sound slid through the cracks of the building and into my bones. It wasn't the playful kind of yipping you hear near suburbs. It was distant and sharp, more like warning calls than conversation. They were far away, but it felt like their territories formed a ring around the town, leaving Cabin Reach in the center like a wound. Nothing but humans and their cattle dared live near it. Not for long. That was the truth you could hear in the coyotes' voices, even if you didn't want to. Their song wasn't about hunger. It was about foolishness, about what happens when people insist on living where they aren't wanted. Morning came with weak sunlight and the smell of coffee. The old person handed me a steaming cup that I accepted with real gratitude. It warmed my hands and gave me something solid to hold. They were already dressed, boots and hat on, ready to ride into town with me like this was just another errand. I helped them into the cab of my pickup and then climbed in after. We drove in near silence. It wasn't awkward. It felt more like the quiet had rules, like too many words would disturb something listening. The only real exchange we had was when they said, without looking at me, "You're not looking for answers. You're seeking responsibility. This isn't what you're hoping for, but you are needed here." I didn't argue. I didn't pretend I didn't understand. I just nodded. In town, people called the old person Sam. That name opened doors for me. With Sam beside me, ranchers answered my questions instead of turning me away. We visited 3 homesteads, and at each one, I heard a version of the same story. Something was mutilating cattle. 3 ranchers gave 3 answers, but the shape underneath was identical. At night, nobody goes out, one man said, eyes hard with exhaustion. That's its time. It came onto my land. I lost 2 head in 2 nights. Another shook his head. "I ain't seen no lights like those UFO folks asked about," he said. "But I've got 6 missing since then." The 3rd rancher looked pale when he spoke. "There wasn't any blood on the one I found," he said, "and nothing scavenged it. Something killed it and left all the meat." The details didn't match perfectly, and that mattered. But the fear did. The fear was consistent. The fear made the story stick together like wet paper. Sam took out my journal and, with hands that trembled, drew a crude map using charcoal. They switched the charcoal from one hand to the other, pausing when their fingers cramped. "These 3 points hold the town in the center," Sam said, tapping the places where the ranchers lived. "The creek runs this way, starts with the Gastons and exits through Pentry's land." I studied the sketch. It was rough, but it made enough sense. And one home stood out to me, sitting alone on the other side of the creek, apart from the cluster of town and ranch land. It sat near a well. "Whose home is that?" I asked. Sam's expression changed slightly, the way a face changes when it brushes against something uncomfortable. "That's where the young widow lives," they said. "She's got 3 little ones. Gets a pension. Keeps to herself. Quiet." I traced the lines on the map with my finger. Her house was between 2 of the recent kill zones. "I'd like to go there," I said. See if she's worried. If you must, Sam said carefully, take me home first. I think this is where you start searching the ground. I drove Sam back and helped them out, but they refused to let me guide them into the shop. Pride, maybe, or fear of needing someone. They wanted to stand on their own feet in their own doorway. I waited until they were inside, then I left. The afternoon was fading when I drove through town again. People were closing early, locking doors, pulling curtains. You could feel the shared decision to be indoors before dark, like a rule no one had to say out loud. The sky turned pink, and even before the sun fully dipped, a full white moon rose as if it had climbed too close. It looked huge, like it belonged in the atmosphere instead of far away. My pickup took the back road around the ranches and over the creek, to the widow's place just outside Cabin Reach. The moon hung in front of the sunset like 2 times of day overlapping in the same sky. I pulled into the driveway and stopped. The silence out there felt thick. I stepped out and let my door slam shut, not out of anger, but to announce myself. I wanted whoever was inside to hear me clearly. A porch light clicked on. A moment later, 3 small faces appeared at the front door, stacked one above the other, curious and pale in the porch light. My name's Gwydion, I called, keeping my voice calm. I'm just checking to see if you folks need anything. I heard about the trouble in town. The kids didn't look afraid. Not of me. They looked curious, like I was a visitor from a story they'd heard but never expected to see. They disappeared back inside without saying anything, and I heard their feet shuffle across the floor. My hearing picked up movement below ground. Something under the house. A basement door, maybe. A muffled knock. A lock turning from the inside. Then another sound, steady and measured. The ticking of a grandfather clock. The front door opened again. A woman stepped out onto the porch, wearing an old bathrobe. I wasn't prepared for the way I reacted to seeing her. I froze, not because she moved suddenly or looked threatening, but because the air around her felt different. She smelled sweet and sharp at the same time, like wine turning or fruit fermenting. It wasn't perfume. It was her. The scent carried even across the yard, and my senses refused to ignore it. Her eyes were gold. Actually, gold. And they held light in a way that made them look unreal under the porch lamp. Her features were perfectly balanced, her mixed ancestry giving her a kind of beauty that didn't belong to any one place. They were the kind of face you'd expect to see in an old painting, the kind that makes you stare because your brain wants to understand why it feels familiar. I realized, with a jolt of embarrassment, that I was attracted to her. Hard, immediate. It hit me so fast it made me feel shy in a way I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. And beneath that attraction, there was something else, the sense that I was standing too close to a cliff edge. She looked at me without smiling, without frowning, just waiting, patient, like time didn't press on her the way it pressed on everyone else. Who are you? I heard myself ask, and hated how blunt it sounded as soon as it left my mouth. Call me Vanessa, she said. She offered the back of her hand slightly, not like a handshake, more like the way someone offers a hand for an animal to sniff. There was no warmth in the gesture, but no hostility either. Just a test, a boundary. We were still 15 feet apart, but I felt like I could reach her with one step. The space between us felt unreal, like distance was a suggestion. She held that position for a moment longer, then nodded once. Is that all you needed? She asked. No, I said quickly, then slowed myself down. I came to check on you. I asked around about the killings. Sam drew a map. At the name, something flickered in her expression. It was gone instantly, but I caught it. Sam? She repeated, like she was tasting the word. Yes, I said. They pointed out the well and your home. They said you're a widow with kids. I just wanted to make sure you're all right. I was talking too fast, I knew it. I couldn't stop. We're all right, she said. Thank you for your concern. Then she looked at me with a focus that made the hair on my arms rise. You're not with the sheriff, she said. or the others who came to town. No, I said. And you're not alone either, are you, Gwydion? She added. The way she said my name felt like a hand closing around it. I understood what she meant. Not alone. Not in the simple sense. The parts of me I don't talk about. The instincts that aren't fully human. The sense that there's always something watching with me. The inner companions I've lived with so long they feel like organs. I wasn't alone. I'm never alone, I said. To my surprise, I smiled when I said it like it was a private joke. Vanessa smiled too. Her teeth caught the porch light, white and clean. And for a second it looked like something sharper was hiding behind them. Could you leave us alone, she asked softly, and come back tomorrow, please? It felt like a command. I can do that, I said. Sure. She didn't invite me closer. She didn't step toward me. She only gestured, and I obeyed, backing away to my truck. I glanced over my shoulder as I drove off and saw her still watching me from the porch, still as a statue. The drive back to the truck stop ended under the full rise of the moon. Moonlight washed the desert in pale color, turning everything into sharp shadows and empty space. The silence out there was wrong. The desert is not a quiet place. There are always insects, always wind, always something shifting. But under that bright moon, it was as if every living thing had agreed to stop moving. I parked and lay back in the seat, the place I often slept. But I felt uneasy, like I'd set my head down in a place I wasn't allowed to rest. Like I was sleeping on land that belonged to something else. It felt like the whole town was doing the same thing. Heads on pillows, eyes open, listening to the emptiness. Even the cattle in distant fields stayed quiet, as if they knew that making noise would invite attention. Then somewhere far off, I heard a sound that made my stomach turn. A single cry. It wasn't a normal moo. It sounded like an animal giving birth, long and strained, but there was something mournful in it too, like prayer, like pleading, like it was asking the sky for clouds, for rain, for anything that would cover it from the moon's gaze. I felt sick with pity. That cow was calling out while even the crickets waited for darkness to return. And then my blood ran cold. From below the rocks, below the dirt, below the idea of the town itself, something answered. A howl rose up like it came from underground. It echoed through stone. It sounded ancient and territorial, like a warning not meant for human ears. The vibration traveled through the tires of my truck and into the glass. My bones felt it, my teeth felt it, my ears heard it, and something inside me recognized instantly that whatever made that sound was not something I could fight. Nobody was a match for it. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I stayed vigilant until the sky lightened, and when morning finally came, I drove into town and saw the strain written on everyone's faces. People moved like they hadn't rested, like they'd spent the night listening for a sound they didn't want to hear again. That's when I saw the UFO hunters. They had a van with cameras and gear, and they acted like they belonged, like they were on vacation. They were nosy, smiling too much, asking the same questions over and over. But there was something off about them. They were too comfortable, too watchful. Their eyes took in details the way professionals do, not the way hobbyists do. They spent money freely. They bought trinkets, bought beers, tipped heavy. The townspeople tolerated them because money softens fear. It makes people forget the risk for a while. They smelled like cheap menthol cigarettes, like the habit had soaked into their skin. My instincts told me they were lying. They weren't here for UFOs. They couldn't hide that from me any more than a person can hide a fever from a dog. And they noticed me too. They gave me space, avoided me, always keeping a wide arc like they didn't want to get too close. They tried to make it look natural, but it wasn't. It was careful. The sheriff noticed them, but he watched me more. He caught me near the edge of the main street, stepping out from around a corner like he'd been waiting. "You're the new person in town," he said, and it sounded like an accusation, not a greeting. I felt the pressure of him immediately. He had the kind of presence that fills a room without raising his voice. I'd like to find out what you brought to offer, he continued. My little camp is right here. He nodded toward a small police station he was using as a temporary headquarters. He deputized the two local officers and brought one of his own, a small pack, like Sam had implied, men who moved together. I followed him inside. The air smelled like dust and old coffee. He told me to sit while the others stood around me, and then he pulled a chair up close and sat across from me. Sheriff Tidemeyer, he said. And yours? Gwydion, I replied. I'm a migrant worker. Just Gwydion? He asked when I didn't add a last name. Yes, I said. I was looking for work. Cabin Reach has a lot of hands leaving. Sure does, he said slowly. You heard the night. Heard the ranchers' tales. You know why. It's the same thing that brought the UFO folks here, he continued. Cattle mutilations. It's why I'm here too, with Deputy Pritchett. I was curious. Aha, he mouthed. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a round. The bullet matched the weapon on the table beside us, a desert camouflaged carbine. But the tip was silver. He held it up so I could see it clearly. I don't believe in things people fear, he said. Don't believe in lights in the sky or folklore. He turned the bullet slightly between his fingers. What I do believe in is never underestimating anything, he added. Or anyone. That's a silver bullet, I said, genuinely surprised. The sheriff's eyes narrowed just a fraction, and I could tell he liked my reaction, like it confirmed something for him. I made it myself, he said. It's called Moonlighter. It does the job of making sure I've taken every precaution, no matter how inconceivable. His voice didn't change when he said it. No joking, no embarrassment, just certainty. I never rule out the possibility of the impossible, he continued. I don't make mistakes that way. I looked at him and understood what kind of man he was. A man who doesn't need to believe in monsters to prepare for them. A man who builds his world around worst-case scenarios and calls it professionalism. I heard about the killings before I got here, I admitted, more out of respect than trust. It's why I came. I'm here to help. Thank you, he said finally, in a tone that didn't sound thankful at all. Just Gwydion. Then he smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Stay out of the way and I won't have to arrest you for interfering with law enforcement, he said. You can go now. It would be best if you moved on. I stood up. He stayed seated, calm, putting Moonlighter back into his breast pocket like it belonged there. Like superstition and pragmatism could live in the same place as long as he stayed in control. I left and spent the day walking the perimeter of the ranches, watching the fences, reading the ground. It didn't take long to find signs that had nothing to do with monsters. Someone had repaired a section of fencing recently. The wire was newer, the posts disturbed. Not far from it were tire tracks, deep and wide, like a large livestock truck had come through. This was the ranch with missing cattle. Baffle's big brand, Triple B. They'd had visitors. I spotted a cigarette butt in the dirt, so fresh the ash was still intact. I picked it up carefully and smelled it. Menthol, cheap and sharp. The UFO hunters. They weren't looking for lights in the sky. They were rustlers, scouting during the day and coming back at night, using the town's fear as cover. The ranchers hadn't seen headlights, hadn't seen flashlights, because these men knew what they were doing. They were slipping in where nobody wanted to look. I thought about how I'd seen them talking in town, asking about access, making casual friends with the right people. I remembered them hanging around Pentry's sons, laughing too easily. So I walked toward Pentry's land at dusk. By the time I arrived, the van was gone, but I knew they'd be back. A dog charged toward me from the yard, barking hard, then stopped short like it had hit an invisible wall. It sat down, whining, and stared at me with wide eyes. Animals know. They don't need evidence. I crouched and let it sniff me. Then I scratched behind its ears. I spoke softly, asking permission in the only way I knew how. The dog calmed, and something in her expression shifted from alarm to uneasy agreement. She ran back toward the house as night fell. I moved through the yard and into the grazing land beyond. From a window, the dog watched me but didn't bark again. We had an understanding. If something else came, if real intruders showed up, she'd sound the alarm, and I'd hear it from the creek side. Out among the herd, I murmured gently as I walked. The cows were tense under the rising moon, heads down, bodies still, like they were trying to disappear into their own skin. With me among them, they only had one thing left to fear. Then I noticed the sheriff. He was staked out under trees in his vehicle, alone watching the back access road that ran along the creek. He had night vision binoculars, but the moonlight was bright enough to paint the whole land in silver. He hadn't seen me. An hour passed, slow and quiet, and then the livestock truck arrived just like I'd expected. The so-called UFO hunters got out and went to work at the fence, but their angle kept them out of the sheriff's direct view. It was almost unbelievable. They were stealing right under his nose. Then the dog started barking, and then she stopped. The sudden silence hit me like a slap. A barking dog doesn't stop like that unless something makes her. That's when I felt it. Movement in the scrub. Not from the rustlers, not from cattle. Something else. Something that didn't move, like a man. The sheriff must have sensed it too, because he got out of his vehicle and stepped away from his stakeout position, trying to see what was out there. I ran toward him, not to save him out of heroism, but because I knew if he fired, if he used Moonlighter on the wrong target, the night would explode into chaos. The thing came into view, and my breath caught. Golden eyes, white teeth. It stood tall, elongated, its body wrong in the way nightmares are wrong. The shape of it was vaguely human, but only vaguely, like something had studied a person from a distance and copied the outline without understanding the rules inside. Its bones and muscles looked stretched, pulled tight over a frame built for a different world. Bristly hair ran along it, and its pointed ears twitched as it focused on me. Saliva dripped from its mouth, and the smell of it hit me, wild and sharp, and too alive. When it flexed its hands, knife-like claws slid free, and the sound of that small movement sent a jolt through my chest. It growled, low and deep, and the growl shook me in a place I didn't know could shake. Then I caught another scent beneath the animal stink. Sweet, fermented, familiar. My mind snapped the pieces together in one sick, sudden click. Vanessa. I understood then that I was standing between a predator and a man with a gun, and I was the only one there who knew what was about to happen if the wrong choice was made. I made myself visible. I made myself the focus. I led the creature away across the ranch, drawing it off like you draw a dog away from a child. Except this was no dog. It followed, stalking but hesitating at moments, as if something about me bothered it. As if the parts inside me, my instincts, my inner watchers, were enough to make it cautious. I stopped and turned, forcing myself not to run. It stopped too. In the moonlight, I could finally admit what my senses were telling me. This wasn't an it. This was her. She lifted her head toward the moon, then looked back at me, and for a moment there was something like recognition in her golden eyes. Not kindness, not mercy, recognition. Then she turned and moved away, slipping into the long shadows with a speed that made my stomach drop. She ran toward the direction of her home. I stood there shaking, breathing hard, feeling both relief and dread. If I'd threatened her, if I'd acted like prey, if I'd made the wrong movement, she could have killed me easily. I knew that in my bones. Behind me, the sheriff was coming fast. He'd found the tracks she left. He was following them in the right direction. He had his gun, and I had no doubt Moonlighter was loaded. I made noise. I snapped a branch, kicked through brush, drew his attention the way you draw a flashlight beam. When he saw me, he shifted toward me, cautious, suspicious, and I led him away from her trail. I brought him straight to the men loading cows into the truck. They were nearly finished when we reached the fence line, but the sheriff saw them clearly in the moonlight. He didn't rush them like an action hero. He didn't fire. He watched, measured, and then he backed off to his vehicle and called in an interception like a man who wanted the whole thing clean and undeniable. I didn't see the ambush. I didn't need to. When dawn came and I walked into town, the rustlers were in jail. Every last one of them. The streets were alive in a way I hadn't seen since I arrived. People were outside, talking loudly, laughing, slapping each other on the back. Relief made them careless. They were blaming the rustlers for everything, even though the killings had started almost a year before those men ever showed up. I stood still in the middle of all that noise and looked across the street. Sheriff Tidemeyer stood still, too. He watched the crowd like he didn't hear it, like he was thinking about the parts that didn't fit. His eyes found mine, and in that brief look we shared the same understanding. This wasn't the whole answer. This wasn't the end. Getting away from him after that was difficult. He followed me more than once, always at a distance. Only when I headed in the direction of the truck stop did I finally lose him. The first thing I did was drive to Vanessa's. My hands were tight on the steering wheel the entire way. My thoughts were too loud. Part of me wanted to see her again for reasons I didn't want to admit. Another part of me wanted to confirm the truth so I could decide what I was supposed to do with it. When I arrived, her car was gone. The front door was open. The house felt wrong immediately, like a place where a life had been interrupted mid-sentence. I stepped inside and saw a half-eaten breakfast still on the table. A discarded backpack sat on the floor, half stuffed with clothes. They hadn't packed calmly. They'd grabbed what they could and left fast. On the wall, taped crookedly, was a child's drawing. 3 children, each holding an ice cream cone. Their mother held an ice cream in each hand, too, like she had enough to give and wanted them to feel safe. It was the kind of drawing that would make you smile in any other context. In that house, it felt like an attempt to pretend the world was normal. I looked at other drawings. Nothing useful, nothing that explained where they'd gone. Then, I went to the basement door. It was heavy. It could be locked and deadbolted from the inside, and the wood around it was scarred with deep scratches. The stairwell walls had gouges like something had tried to climb them. Down there, I found ropes and chains bolted into the concrete. Not decorations, not old farm equipment. These were restraints. A small mattress lay in the corner, stained and flattened. Bristly hairs clung to it. I leaned in and smelled the fabric. The scent hit me hard. Her scent, sweet and fermented, mixed with the animal musk of the beast. Vanessa knew I knew, and she probably knew the sheriff would figure it out too if he hadn't already. She was gone. She wasn't coming back. A car rolled up outside while I was still in the house. I rushed to a window and saw Sheriff Tidemeyer coming up the driveway. For one stupid second, I thought about facing him, explaining, warning him. I didn't even know what I would say, that I'd met the widow, that I'd smelled the truth, that the monster he was hunting might also be the mother of 3 children who could smile and draw pictures and ask someone to come back tomorrow. Instead, I did the only thing that felt possible. I ran. I got into my truck and drove past him. I saw his hand move toward his lights and siren, but he hesitated. He didn't chase me. He just watched me go, and the look on his face said he had a better plan than speeding after me. I left cabin reach behind and followed the direction my instincts told me she'd gone. I had to see her again. I don't know why "had to" is the only phrase that fits, but it is. Curiosity doesn't cover it. Attraction doesn't cover it. Duty doesn't cover it. It felt like something had latched onto me the moment I saw her eyes, and now my life had shifted around that latch. I drove mile after mile. Sometimes I caught her scent on the wind. Faint, but real. Sometimes, impossibly, I thought I could hear children laughing somewhere far off, carried through open space, as if the land itself was playing tricks on me. I went from town to town, always arriving after she'd already left, always one step behind, like she wanted me close enough to keep following, but never close enough to catch her. The full moon was approaching again, and I knew what that meant. She would need somewhere to hide, somewhere to hold herself, somewhere to keep from becoming what she became under that light. I found the first cave she'd used. Inside were old manacles, rusted but real, marks on stone, a place where a small camp had been made more than once, scraps of food wrappers, a few crushed cans. This was a place with history. She'd used it before. The discovery didn't make me feel victorious. It made me feel hopeless, like I was chasing something I would never understand. And the closer I got, the more dangerous the chase became. Not just because of her, but because of everything attached to her. By then, I was exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. Haunted, my nerves felt stretched thin, like they'd snap if one more strange thing happened. That's when I stopped at a roadside diner. Nothing special. Just coffee, a booth, a few tired strangers minding their own business. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, stared at myself in the mirror like I could force my eyes to look normal again. When I came back out, I found it on the table, on top of my bill. Moonlighter. Sheriff Tidemeyer's silver-tipped round. That was the moment I understood the truth I'd been avoiding. While I'd been following her, someone else had been following me.